Hi, I am the most bannable 2-mana spell in Standard. Kira.
Hi, I'm the worst 3-mana enchantment seeing 4 of Standard play. Maya. And today, we're talking about competitive season.
'Tis the season to be competitive.
Woo! Yeah, 100%. We're talking about competitive season, not Pro Tour season, but rather the far more exciting RC season, or the regional championship season. So just for clarification, regional championships, for those who don't know, are events that you have to qualify for. And if you finish high enough, it's usually either top 12 or top 16. You get an invite to the Pro Tour, and usually the winner gets an invite to Worlds. These are huge events. They're very, very exciting, and they're fun to be at, and it's just, it's so good. But it does some fun things to the Standard meta.
It does some fun things. It also reveals a lot about the Standard meta. And boy, oh boy, did we have some information revealed to us. There have been RC events in Bologna, Minneapolis, and Japan.
And we've got one coming up in Melbourne quite soon.
Yes, as of recording, this weekend is the Melbourne RC. So we are seriously stuck in the middle of Standard RC season. And we have seen so many cool decks, actually. While there are a lot of decks in the meta at these events that we kind of expected, Is It Prowess being one of the forefront runners of new current best deck in Standard, as well as Jeskai Oculus, Esper Pixie, Orzhov Pixie. There have also been some real weird ones out there. I saw Bant Mill. I saw Boros Monument. There's a lot of weird things running around right now, and it's super exciting.
I think I'm going to paraphrase Simon Nielsen here because I didn't go to the effort of writing down the actual quote. But he essentially said that normal Standard season is just people taking decks from the last online challenge and playing them in the next online challenge, and we rinse and repeat. But for RCs, we see fundamentally, because it is only one large event, we see adaptation. We see people kind of bringing a new take either on a given deck or on a sideboard plan, or even entirely new decks to attack the meta in different ways. And this adaptation is really, really awesome for like the development of a healthy Standard format, because not only do you get this sort of interplay that keeps some decks down and, pushes some decks up, but getting a good read on that allows you to play wild and wacky decks and actually do quite well. Everything from, Mono White Caretaker to Azorius United Battlefront Artifacts. Yes, please. It's such a good time for Standard right now. And if you're not watching this coverage, you should be.
Coverage is always really exciting. If you have not watched competitive professional level Magic, it is a real joy. It's so exciting. Every time I sit down to watch coverage, I learn so much. Not only do you have amazing commentators, Simon Nielsen was one of the commentators for RC Bologna. He's an amazing professional player. And so he was doing the commentary with Philippa. And it's amazing listening to people who are so ingrained. You also have amazing stalwarts of the Magic community like Corey Baumeister. You have Ailey Lonnie. You have amazing, amazing people who know so much. Jim Davis was just doing the commentary for SCG Con Minneapolis, which was the RC Minneapolis. And then watching people who know their decks intimately well, who know the lines incredibly well, make decisions and play in a specific fashion to adapt to this new meta, it's amazing. It is so fascinating to watch. It taught me a lot about the decks. I understood what Is It Prowess was doing, but I didn't know how. And so getting to sit down and watch coverage for, my goodness, 10 hours. And I was at some points watching it on 1.5 times speed.
10 hours.
For
a
day
day.
One. Yeah, for day one, coverage was 10 hours. And there's breaks in between there. There's time in between rounds. But ultimately, hours and hours of Standard coverage. There is so much to watch and there is so much to learn. And what you've touched on as well is the increased rate of change amongst these decks and the ways that decks are changing and adapting in a different arena.
Yep. One of the coolest things about competitive season is that there is all of a sudden so much more focus on given decks, right? So of course we see different rates of play and like a rapid rate of change in how decks are adapting, but also we see fringe decks in the spotlight.
We did also just, it hasn't come out yet, but we did spend an episode talking about fringe decks.
We did.
Their place in the meta and how useful they are.
And not only do we see them pop up a lot more in the context of of RCs because they attack the meta in a very specific way, oftentimes coverage teams will try to highlight these cool decks, especially in the early rounds, so they get airtime. And what that means is that when cool decks get airtime, people pick them up. People will start playing with them. They will start being dedicated to kind of fixing them, making them better, cleaning up play, and all of a sudden you get another Azorius Omniscient style deck kind of like popping into the top 8 of events. It's incredibly cool. I'm incredibly excited. But also, it means that these professional players, these pros, and we'll call them semi-pros, right? People who are at the RC levels who are very, very good at Magic, but who aren't at the Pro Tour Worlds level. You see them spending far more time dedicated to playing Standard and iterating on Standard decks. So not only you get an increased rate of change from the nature of the season, you get a wider variety of decks because of the nature of the events. You get more of the fringe decks in the spotlight in a competitive context, and you get some of the best players in the world focusing more heavily on the format and on these decks and all these interactions, and it creates this beautiful melting pot of a standard metagame where everything's a little bit the Wild West, and you get to see crazy new stuff, and you see the best decks overrepresented, and you see these cool interactions between the things. And not only that, but as you said, you have the wonderful, wonderful coverage team. God bless them, because their job must be so hard. Keeping track of all of it and giving you the play-by-play and how things are interacting and how the matchup needs to be played and sideboards. It's so wonderful. I love competitive season so much. I will be watching these RCs for the next weeks and weeks and weeks.
Something that Ben said, and we reference Ben a lot, but that's because Ben is an amazing Pro Tour player, and he's an amazing Magic player. Something that Ben said is that Magic is a game about information. And right now, we have a glut of information. We are getting overwhelmed with information. People are putting data sheets together. People are putting graphs together. They're running the numbers on exactly how, like, win rates against every different matchup. We are seeing the ways in which, this deck, this card is included across 70% of decks. This card is included across 50% of decks. This card is showing up not only in mono red aggro decks, but it's showing up in Jeskai decks as well. We are getting so much information about Standard right now, and it's amazing. I am bathing in the information. I'm just letting it wash over me. And there are a lot of, currently true things about Standard that we're getting reiterated back to us. Stock Up is a good card. Cori-Steel Cutter is a messed up card. And that's like it.
And Turning Creatures Sideways is profitable.
Turning Creatures Sideways is profitable. Reanimating Omniscience on turn 4 is a game ender. There's lots of, current fundamental truths about Standard that we're just having echoed back to us. And that's really good. It also shows us a lot of ways in which Standard is consistent. It also shows us ways in which it is perhaps too consistent. Cori-Steel Cutter, this fantastic person on Twitter, and this was a graph that went up in our most recent episode. Their username is I Love Azorius, which I appreciate. Azorius I on Twitter said, put up a graph and was like, this is data from RC Minneapolis, day 1 of the Japanese event, and one other event. It was Bologna. And it had at the very top, Is It Prowess? And it had nearly 3,000 matches, calculated. And across 3,000 matches, Is It Prowess currently has a 54% win rate.
Which is lower than Overlords had, just saying.
Which is lower than Overlords, but again, if we also then look at the dilation of how many matches Overlords played in the Pro Tour, 3,000 is 10 times more. So that level of information is really critical. And that level of play is vital to understanding how powerful a card is. It's what I've said previously, when you see some creators go on Arena and they say that this deck has a 75% win rate, it went 6-2, and you're like, okay, 8 matches. That's fantastic. I like to see that, I could go to a qualifier event and make top 8 with that. That's really, really good. But 8 versus 3,000 matches, a 54% win rate across 3,000 matches is so much more impressive and has so much more weight behind it because it has the experience of likely playing across every single deck in the meta, across fringe decks, across meta decks, in the mirror, all of it. It's amazing. So this competitive season, I just love it. I love watching matches. I love listening to coverage.
The thing about preparing for an RC is that while it is very high level, there's lots of like planning and gameplay and testing involved, and you can listen to our episode with Ben for the details on how all of that works. It is in a time-constrained environment. And what that means is that you're incentivized, if a deck is clearly overperforming in the context of the metagame, to just play that deck, right? There is an inherent underlying incentive to do the thing that you already know is good because you can spend the additional time perfecting and tweaking that instead of trying to build something new or to substantially change something existing in order to like attack the format in a specific way, especially if you are just generally on the competitive grind and you're going from competitive event to competitive event. Because it's currently modern season, regardless of how much standard the competitive players are playing, they've up to relatively recently been playing almost exclusively modern, and in our case, because we're Australian, Highlander.
So what are we seeing on what is the effect of this competitive season on the quality of play overall?
It's going to increase quality of play. The reason being that the competitive players are playing standard. So just by law of averages, the average quality of standard gameplay in any context, particularly on Arena, if you're an Arena gamer, will go up because good players are playing standard on Arena at the moment. There's also the observer effect, and I'm sure that is not the name for the effect that I'm calling it, but we're gonna call it that for now. And write me an email and tell me I'm wrong. When you are watching someone play standard, especially when they're playing a deck that you play and you have the commentators explaining how and why they are doing everything that they're doing, you kind of absorb some skill just by osmosis, right? And because these high skill plays are being brought to the forefront of your mind, and as you continue to play, will be ingrained into your play pattern. So whenever there are these high coverage, high quality events, the standard of play tends to increase.
More people thinking about the format lends itself to innovation. It lends itself as well to the adaptation of fringe decks into the meta. Someone is able to look at, I like the idea of mill, but I can't quite figure out what it's missing, but this card synergizes really well, so maybe if I tweak here and I tweak there, oh, look at that, this Bant mill deck runs really well. Having more people involved in the format, having more decks in the format, having more people look at and play and test in the format makes the format better. More people experimenting and more people playing in the format, in the big ball pit that is currently standard, you get, again, more information. And you get refined information as well about, we really tried hard to make this card work, and no matter what shell we put it in, it can't run. The engine stalls. So we're not going to play that anymore. And we found that once we took it out, the deck ran like a dream.
The deck in my mind that has seen the greatest facelift from this RC.
Say it.
Is Azorius Battlefront Artifacts.
I feel like I've been hit by a truck.
No, I mean, look, obviously, the thing is, Orzhov Pixie was already good, right? So it hasn't had a facelift. People are just playing it the amount that they should be playing it. This is my TED Talk. Thank you.
Well, and the reason I'm so expectant for you to say Orzhov Pixie is because what we're seeing now is an actual uptick in people playing Orzhov Pixie. Because initially, as we saw at Pro Tour Aetherdrift, it was one Benjamin Stark who was playing Orzhov Pixie. And now people have played, tested, changed. Sunpearl Kieran has come in. Slower versions, as we were talking about, are playing Overlord of the Baelmerk and Scroll Shift as well. Now that there are more people playing it, more people testing with it, more people trying out different things, people are cluing on to Orzhov Pixie and going, this deck's pretty good. And even against the best deck in the format, out of those nearly 3,000 matches with Izzet Prowess, has a 39 win % rate against Orzhov Pixie.
Yeah.
It's abysmal.
Temporary Lockdown, good card.
Temporary Lockdown, great against Izzet Prowess.
But yeah, believe it or not, I wasn't actually joking when I said
Azorius Battlefront Artifacts does actually it changed a lot, and it changed really well.
The deck that I feel like got the most from the RC is definitely this deck, because it got a great piece from Tarkia Dragonstorm, which is, I believe, Battlefront formation it's called.
United Battlefront.
United Battlefront, very good. Yes, Collected Company, United Battlefront. That makes sense. And it shifted out of because originally this deck was blue-black, and you were doing it with Oil Deep Gear Hulks. But I think the blue-white version is just so much better. You have the ability to go way further over the top. You get to play Temporary Lockdown to reasonable effect. You're only playing 2 Repurposing Bay. You're not relying too heavily on this sort of incremental value from this slow 3-mana card that you have to spend a minimum of 5 mana on to get any sort of benefit. And, there are significant benefits. Turning your spring-loaded saw blades, or whatever it's called, into a simulacrum synthesizer is a real upside. But the fact that you now have 8 ways, essentially, to put a bunch of artifacts in play, this is, of course, United Battlefront and Kayla's Reconstruction, all of a sudden you have this really, really powerful top-end deck that is actually able to contend with these lower to the ground decks. Now, don't get me wrong, its mono red matchup, still abysmal. Still absolutely unimaginably heinous.
Yeah, it turns out playing a Simulacrum Synthesizer on turn 3 against a mono red aggro player is just bad.
Yeah, it's kind of trash. But fortunately, the Cori-Steel Cutter Izzet deck is actually slightly slower than mono red, and because it is so ubiquitous and has a good matchup against mono red, we've seen a downtick. So all of a sudden we have this deck that was already kind of quite powerful, got a bunch of new pieces, got a bunch of attention, shifted colors, and is now actually better positioned in the context of the metagame. I think this deck's really good, and this is the kind of thing that can only happen in RC season, or that if it were to happen outside of RC season, would happen slowly over the course of months. But now I get to play with my new toy now! The RC is just such a great thing. And speaking of RCs, you should go to yours. Even if you're not qualified. RCs, they tend to be mini versions of the Grand Prix of old. I'm not sure. Did you ever get to go to a GP?
I never went to a Grand Prix.
Oh,
no.
They're so cool.
No, I sadly, my foray into competitive Magic has been somewhat recent over the last 2-3 years. And so, unfortunately, and I had such a good opportunity, little did I know when I was living in America, to go to way more RCs and Grand Prix, but unfortunately my foray has been very recent. So
that would have been back in the SCG Con era as well.
Yeah, well, and the current SCG Con era, that was where RC Minneapolis was at SCG Con Minneapolis.
Amazing. But yeah, you should go, even if you're not qualified, because, first of all, there are LCQs. LCQs are last chance qualifiers. And oftentimes, if you want kind of a good deal on dollars per game of Magic played, there are usually unlimited LCQ passes that you can buy. That is essentially, you go, you buy the pass, usually you have to buy it ahead of time, and then you get to enter as many LCQs as you can on Friday, because they run the day before, and the idea being that if you win, you get qualified for the event the next day. Now, I've done this a couple of times, and it's so much fun because you pay I think it was $100 for me, and I played 8 Magic tournaments. And it was great! And I didn't qualify, but I had a great time because I was jamming, at the time, Blue, White, Control, and Pioneer. I just got to do that over and over and over again. And you know what I did the next day? I played Modern and won, because all the good players were playing in the RC. Because there are also lots of side events. Right? You've got drafts firing all the time. These can be just your normal set draft, which at the moment is Tarkia Dragonstorm. Oh, heavens. But also cool stuff. There's often Mystery Booster Sealed. There are things like Whale Drafts, which are drafts with either collector boosters or boosters of particularly expensive old packs. There are chaos drafts, which is just like a random assortment of packs collected that you then go draft. There's also sealed. There's almost certainly will be on-demand constructed events if you're not feeling like playing standard on any given day. And on Sundays, there are your second chance events. These are often like either 5 or 10Ks, depending on how big the tournament is. So for a 5K or a 10K means $5,000 in the prize pool or $10,000 in the prize pool. And they're similar to the RC. They're these competitive level events for usually whatever format the RC is. And you get to just play a bunch more Magic. It's a great excuse to just go play Magic with friends in a cool spot. The vibes are typically immaculate.
There's also oftentimes Commander free play. If you don't want to spend money, you just want to go and hang out and play Magic.
Nerds.
There's a lot of Commander free play as well. So even if you and your friends just want to go and check it out and check out a professional level event, spectate a few matches, look at some coverage, run around the vendor hall, and then just sit down and play Magic together, it's a great event to just go out to.
The last thing I will say is that coverage is not something that needs to be watched continuously. I watch coverage like I watch cricket. That's not true. I don't watch cricket. But having it on just in the background while you do things, stick it on your TV, let it play out, absorb some info by osmosis. Or one thing I did once, which was great fun, is I just invited a bunch of friends over and we played Magic and we ate chips and we watched the RC coverage, and it was an absolute blast. There's so much fun that you can have in this sort of like heavy RC competitive season. And I really, really recommend making the most of it whenever it comes around.
Look, again, we are big advocates of the gathering. The point of all of this often is bringing people together. We are all here because we love Magic. We're all here because we want to play more Magic. Hopefully you're also here because you want to play more Standard and you're curious about the Standard format and the events that get run and the tournaments that happen. But ultimately, we're here together. And that's one of the best parts about the game.
We're all in this together.
We don't want to get copyright struck, so we're gonna stop singing.
It's gonna be cut. That's okay. And with all that said, that is actually all that we have time for you today. What?
This is going to be so fun to listen back to.
So yeah, RCs are phenomenal. You should spend as much time around them and in them as you can. And with all that said, that is actually all we have for you today. We look forward to seeing you again next week, with new episodes releasing on Mondays at 11 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. Until then, you can keep track of all our releases at Raise MTG on both Instagram and Blue Sky. You can find Kira on the same platforms at kirabobira.jpg on Instagram and kirabobira on Blue Sky, and myself at MayaMTG on both. A big thank you to the State Library of Victoria for the ongoing use of their space. And until next week, remember, Vinwick's contract demanded at least one dedicated camera on him at all times.